Hey there everybody and welcome back to another default cube tutorial, where in this one I want to finally talk about how I animate, stuff so realistically because, of course, I've released this animation and the question is, do I actually know how to draw or am I doing some procedural nonsense? Either way, what I'm going to be showing you how to do in this tutorial is a method called rotoscoping. This is how I actually made the animation, so I actually film what it is I'm going to animate, and rotoscoping basically means like video tracing. This is the same kind of process that was used in a Scanner Darkly, and I assume also in Waking Life. Both of these movies have the same kind of very realistic kind of tracing kind of vibe. The benefits of doing this is that you get a very realistic look from the get-go. It's not technically too difficult, and the only thing you need to do it, or at least I would recommend, is a graphics tablet. You don't want to draw with a mouse. Graphics tablet is preferred. I'm using the XP Pen Artist Pro 16. It was sent to me for free, so in that sense it's sponsored, but beyond that, just use a graphics tablet. I'll talk more about why I like this one later on, now that I've spent 3 days animating that thing. But just use a graphics tablet and let me talk about how you too can animate stuff super simply. We're going to be covering this shot that I showed you and making the animated version of it. Buckle up, boys. So yes, the first part of this process is preparing the footage, because again, we are going to be using the footage as reference, literally tracing it for the rest of this. So here I have a simple clip that I filmed using my phone. You could literally just use whatever. Of me picking up a Rubik's Cube, and this is what we're going to animate. Now, there's two things I want to change about this before we get it ready for animating. First of all, aspect ratio, not a fan of it, so you can see it's, standard 1080p, 16 by 9 kind of thing. I want it to be more of a 4 by 3 or maybe 1 by 1, just because it's more playful and it looks better, in my opinion. So we're going to kind of crop this thing. And second of all, since we're animating it, we're only going to be animating at something like 12 frames per second, because that's kind of standard, unless, you go into Attack on Titan. Sometimes it's 24, rarely. 12 frames per second not only looks better in terms for animation, but it's also significantly less work because we only have to make 12 drawings every single second. So let's do both of those. To do this, I'm going to make a timeline. You could do this in any program. DaVinci's free though, so why not? I'm going to make a timeline, and I'm not going to use the basic settings. Instead, we want to make sure that it's geared for what we want. So first of all, I said I want that 4 by 3, so I'm just going to do 1440 by 1080. This is just the 4 by 3 aspect ratio of 1080p. Don't worry about it. I'm just picking a resolution, and then for the frame rate, unfortunately, 12 is not an option for some reason, so we're going to do 24 and then do a trick to downscale to 12 frames per second. So create that. We're going to drag this in, and now we have this in the timeline. So first of all, let's crop it so you can see it's kind of looking small with these black bars because, again, it's 4 by 3. So I'm just going to zoom this in, and then let's just find where the beginning of this animation is. So something like here, where you can see the fingers creep in, and then it plays, and then the Rubik's Cube goes out of frame, and let's just go to the frame where it's empty, and we've trimmed it. So this is kind of like our footage. And all we have to do at this point is downscale to 12 frames per second. The way to do this is, I don't know if there's a faster way, but we need it to skip every other frame. So I'm going to make it a compound clip like I did. I'm going to make it twice as fast. So it's kind of showing every second frame, but it's doing it, twice as fast. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to render it and then slow it back down by 50%. So render in place. These settings are fine. And again, what the idea behind this is, if we double the speed, render it, and then half the speed, it's the same as rendering every other frame. And you might be wondering, why didn't you just render the thing from before and keep it that way? It's because I still want to have this 24 frames per second video that's just showing every other frame. So it's 12 frames per second of information, but it's still a 24 FPS video. So there we go. This is our animation. You can go back and add or remove a couple frames, but this is our reference footage. Last thing we need to do, render this thing out, and I'm going to put it in this animation tut folder for this, and I'm going to call this reference, and just render it at, these settings, the correct resolution and frame rate. Again, 24, but it's actually 12, no audio, and let's export that out. Beautiful. And now all we need to do is put it in the background of our grease pencil and start drawing. Okay, so we've rendered out our video. Now we're ready to start doing the grease pencil, but of course we want to put that footage that we rendered in the background so that we can draw on top of it. That's the whole point. So let's just set up our scene. To do this, when you're in Blender, any version, hit Control N, which is going to make a new file. You're like, we're already making a new file? Yes, we are. go to 2D animation, because this is going to make a workspace perfect for grease pencil and pretty much everything we're doing here. So I don't want to make our own workspace. Just do that. Next, we can start drawing, and once we get the graphics tablet out, we can start using changing or variable radius and strength, but whatever. We can draw. But what we want to do is we want to put this footage in the background. Now, traditionally, what you might expect is we'd go to the camera, you'd go to the camera options, and I'm intentionally showing you the wrong thing. You go to background images, load in the movie clip. So this is just all going to be in the background. Load in the reference, got to put it in front and go like that. But then you can see, well, two issues. One, the resolution's wrong, like it looks stretched. But also when we make it fully opaque, you can no longer see the drawing, even though it's there, because it has to be in the foreground for some reason. So I would not recommend this method, because the other one is not only going to fix this, but it's going to give us a lot more control. But while we're here, let's actually fix the resolution. So it's 1440 by 1080. Okay. So again, wouldn't recommend this. Instead, here's what we're going to do. So what I want you to do is realize when we're drawing on this stroke object, what we're actually doing is we're looking through a camera on what is essentially a plane right here, right? When we look through the camera, it looks correct, but otherwise it's just kind of like a 3D object in space, meaning if we want to put a background, we could literally just put a plane behind here, and that's exactly what we're going to do. So go to object mode. We're going to add in a plane. This is going to be our background object, so I'm just rotating it and scaling it and pushing it behind the other. So there's literally like layers to this, like an onion. And we're going to project our footage onto this, which I know seems like more work, but believe me, it's better, and we're going to have more control. So once we have this plane, we can call this BG because it's our background. We just need to make a material for it, and we only need to do this process once. So I'm going into the shader editor to make a material. Let's create a new material. We're going to call this BG, not to be confused with big guitar. No, it's background. And for this material, we're just going to do something simple. So I'm just going to load in an image texture. Of course, that image texture is going to be the footage. So just go back to the reference footage. Make sure that you have enough frames. I think mine was only like 30 frames or something, but if you pick a number that's bigger, it will play the whole footage. Click both of these, and then finally for the coordinate system, so you can just add a texture coordinates node or Control T if you have a node wrangler, I believe. You just want to make sure that we're using windowed coordinates, which means it's going to kind of project through this plane no matter how we're oriented, but specifically when we're looking through the camera view, it's going to be correct. By the way, to not get this repetition, hit clip. So now you can see no matter what we draw, it's going to be on top of it. And because this is now a material, this is the big advantage, we could put some nodes after this footage. So we could actually mix this with the color white, which is perfect because if I want it to be a little bit dimmer, I can now do that. Or in fact, I could do that with any color, which might help readability, especially in these black areas. Additionally, and this is kind of the big deal, we could pass this through a brightness contrast node, and I could bump up the contrast to make certain lines less or more visible. And this will help us drawing in the shadow or highlight areas. So in other words, we've now created a reference background plate that we can alter on the fly and then draw on top of it. So like, for example, we have this thing, and then I could be like, oh, now I know the lines are here and here and here, and we can draw on top of it, go down another frame, draw something else. Of course, this is garbage, but you get the point. So yeah, now we have reference, and again, this thing is in layers is the key insight. So now, I guess let's start animating. Use a graphics tablet if you have one at this point, from this point on. Hey there, I had to do a weird camera setup, so hopefully this all works with the graphics tablet and everything. So a quick crash course on graphics tablets and grease pencil before we start the rotoscoping. So first of all, assuming you're using a graphics tablet, this is going to be different from drawing with a mouse. We actually have a ton more control. So I'm actually going to get rid of the background here so we can see. Again, it's just a layer behind, so we can always hide it. So with the graphics tablet, of course, the main advantage is you have this pen, right? And you can draw, right? So this is already much easier to use than a mouse. But the big deal is I can do light and hard strokes. So for example, here's a light stroke. You can barely see it. It's very thin. But if I push down much harder, you can see I get a much darker, much thicker stroke. And that is dictated by these two buttons next to the radius. This basically means use variable radius using, it basically means use pressure, I guess, using the graphics tablet, and then the same thing for strength. Now, while these are both super convenient, I don't want both of these for what I'm doing. Strength, I'm actually going to turn off, and I want this set at 1, meaning that no matter what stroke I draw, it's always going to be a full strength, a full darkness. But I do want to keep this variable radius at, let's say, 20 pixels. So what this means is I can still make super thin lines if I press lightly. But if I press hard, it's going to give us, something much darker, okay? But it's still going to be, or I guess much thicker, but it's still going to always be the same darkness. That's just for what I'm doing here. And then that's the graphics tablet. Only other thing, by the way, for the stroke, I would recommend enabling stabilized stroke, which what it's going to do, even if you're using a graphics tablet, is it's going to smooth it out. So I'm going to do it by 20 pixels. So now you can see there's kind of like this line following my stroke. Hopefully you can see that. That's going to smooth it out. So no matter how bad your handwriting is, you can actually improve that in CG. Okay, so that's the graphics tablet, and then for the actual animation, grease pencil breakdown. So I've added a grease pencil object. If you don't have one for some reason, let me just get rid of it. You can always Shift-A from the camera view, Shift-A, add in a grease pencil blank stroke. So it's just going to be like a layer in here that we can do stuff with. So you can see we can now, nope. You want to make sure you're in draw mode. That is one thing. So go to draw mode. And now we can draw on top of this. Grease pencil has layers, just like a lot of things in Blender. So we're actually going to make a layer for every single object that we're going to draw. So we're actually going to start off with the hand. Sorry if I keep hitting the microphone. It's kind of difficult doing it like this. So we have a layer for the hand. We could have a layer for the Rubik's Cube. And we could basically just draw one at a time. Okay? So let me just zoom in here. This is our keyframes for what we're doing. Let's just get started. So I have my grease pencil object selected in draw mode using the hand. On frame 1, let's just start drawing. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to trace out this finger. Super simple. Doesn't need to be that good. Now we're going to go to the next frame by going right arrow. So frame 2, you can see is identical because, again, we're animating on 2s. In other words, it's 24 frames per second, but there's only 12 FPS of information. So there's 2 frames repeated every time. Then on frame 3, we get something new. And all we have to do is draw something new. It will get rid of the previous stroke, but it will show us where it was. That's called onion skinning. And we just kind of draw roughly what we see. Now, one thing you're going to notice, and maybe you can prepare for this, it's kind of hard to do it when there's motion blur because all these fingers are smudged together. But if you just make your drawings kind of low detail and smudgy in those moments, then it doesn't matter. So I'm also going to add in these tiny strokes. I'm using kind of a light thing. It doesn't really make sense what I'm doing, like these aren't fingers, but it gives the general impression of fingers, okay? Go to the next frame, and then another. So now go to, the next of the 12 FPS. And we're just going to keep outlining. And you can always go back and forth with this. Like, you don't have to, commit to any single stroke. You can always, undo and delete and all this. That's the beauty of digital art. But you can see how this... you can see how this process, of course, is very time-consuming. But what I do recommend is what we're doing, drawing one thing at a time. So what I did in the beginning when I was animating is I would draw the whole frame every single time. The hand, the Rubik's Cube, the couch, instead of just taking it one object at a time. And this speeds it up because you can actually focus instead of all the nonsense. And at this point, we actually have a fingernail here. So let me just... give the vague impression of a fingernail. And by the way, we're going to go back here again and add a second level of detail being like a tiny bit of shading. So even though if we look at this now, it's kind of like this low resolution thing, you can't tell what it is, we'll go back to it. So you can see if we now play back this animation, we have a couple frames. Okay, so let's just keep going. And then after a bit, of course, I will speed it up. So again, we're going to go 1, 2 frames over. So I guess we're animating on, on every odd frame. By the way, I would recommend if you have a laptop or a graphics tablet, or sorry, of course, a graphics tablet, a graphics card with 2 HDMI ports or more, use that because then you can actually use your monitor along with your graphics tablet. In this case, I'm just using the tablet because recording with OBS is kind of a nightmare while doing all of this and with the webcam and everything. So I'm just going to go like this. Again, just getting the general outline. The cleaner you do this, the better, but it's not a big deal. And another thing you might notice is I'm putting full strength, so it should go up to 20 pixels of radius, the maximum it can be, on these kind of general outlining the hand kind of strokes. And then when we're going for smaller details like this finger shadowing,
I go a bit lighter sometimes. Something like that. Just any kind of vague line you see, maybe outline it a little. Even if it's faint, it will just give a general impression of like depth and all that. And maybe one here. Let's go another 2 frames, because now it's getting a bit more complicated. We have the beads and all this. And by the way, you might think, oh, you wore the beads, that's just more work. And that's true. And you need to think about that. But the reason I actually wore the beads for this recording is that it would actually kind of give us some more definition of the hand, because now you're always going to know where the wrist is. Now at this point, I'm noticing it's a little hard to see what I'm drawing. So we can go back to the background object, go to object mode, background, go to the material. And this is the thing I was talking about before, where we can mix this with the color white and just kind of make it a bit more visible what we're doing. So that's, again, the big use of this. And you can always zoom in and out. Whoops. I always forget to go to draw mode. Draw mode. By the way, control space to maximize a window, like I've been doing. So recently, as you know, because I made that song, I got a tattoo. And when you think about what a tattoo is, it's basically somebody's doing the stroke work, right? Like we're doing here, but on your skin, and there's no undo button. And I found that if I end a stroke, like I did here, and then I continue it, it's very hard to continue it exactly where you left off. So that is a stressful fucking job. I don't know. Like, I would never be a tattoo artist, even if I had the skill. And by the way, if you always have a shaky line, feel free to undo it. I would never be a tattoo artist because, like, the guilt I would feel. They make you sign a release form, of course. Like, it's your problem if you don't like your tattoo or if they fuck up, right? But I don't know. I just feel so bad. So again, generally doing the outline here. And let's see, at this point, we probably have a couple more details. So we have some lines here that I'm just vaguely outlining. Again, we have the fingernail. And you can see with this onion skinning, this green stroke that shows us what we did before. You can see what details he included last time. So if you did a fingernail last time and it's still there, just add it in again. Okay, and of course, let's do the beads. And the beads should be super easy. So just give the general impression of them. Again, what's going to make this look super good is just adding in a tiny bit of shading that we're going to do a bit later. But I'm no animator, you know? We're just keeping it simple. Like this, like that. And you could go a bit off frame there. Okay, so let's see what we have so far, since we should have a couple frames. Let's get rid of this background and play it from the beginning. It's pretty good, actually. I mean, it's only a couple frames, but that is what it would look like. And of course, we're going to add more detail. So I think what I'm going to do at this point is I'm going to show you the rest of the process, but I'm just going to fast forward through it just so it's a lot faster. But I'm just literally repeating more of the same, and I expect as we keep going, we're going to have more and more details. But let's just do a bit of a time lapse at this point.
Okay, so I just finished animating it. I haven't even looked at what it looks like. So let's see what, some manual labor will get you. So you turn off the background and let's just view it. There you go. Now, I think it looks very good. The only thing to remember is why does it look so strange here? There's supposed to be a cube here. So a lot of the fingers are missing because they're, of course, overlapped by something else. But you can see how, it took some time, but not like that much work will get you a pretty realistic looking result. By the way, is the camera still centered? This is something worth checking. Good enough. But yeah, that's the point. So at this point, everything you've done is contained in this layer, so you can hide it, you can show it, you can manipulate it, you can actually even apply modifiers and stuff to it. If you open, it's so hard with the thing, whatever. You can also apply modifiers and stuff. But at this point, I'm pretty happy with the hand, and I guess the next thing to do is just add in a second layer for the Rubik's Cube object. So the way we do that, you add another layer. So this one doesn't have any strokes on it. We call it Rubik's, which is spelled not the way you would expect, maybe. And you can see now we have 2 channels. We have the Rubik's Cube keyframes that have nothing except on the first frame, and the hand. Now, pretty much for this one, it's going to be like exactly the same, but there are some tricks to draw this one faster because it is very geometric and there's a lot of lines. So what I would recommend for this one is instead of being like, oh, there's a line here and here and here, we could speed it up at least a bit. So instead of just using the basic draw tool over here, I'm going to use the line tool. And you could even probably get away with this square or box tool in a creative way. But with the line tool, you literally just click the corner, you drag it, and then click enter,
and you have a line. Now, I guess the main complaint you might have with this is it's going to look too perfect. But there are ways to like even distort this at the end. What you could do, so now I'm going across, kind of making a grid, exactly like a Rubik's Cube is, but so this is kind of like the lazy way of doing it. But what was I saying? You could actually add a bit of noise to this, which will actually give it more of a hand-drawn look, even though, we're putting down perfect lines. So don't feel bad about using like these perfect tools. And I feel like, at least for this part of the animation, unlike the hand, which is kind of like this blob that changes every single frame, this is the ideal way to do this one. So let's just do one frame of this, and then we'll see what that looks like. So like that, like that, like that. And what you could do is, if you want to be super detailed, by the way, you could do this grid, and then you can make even tinier squares because each of these have their own outline and some of them have a weird shape, but whatever. Let's just see what this looks like. We turned this off, and now we have a basic Rubik's Cube. Okay, let's go to the next frame. So same thing as last time, right? So we're gonna be on this layer. We go 1, 2 frames to update, and now it's like exactly the same. When we add in a line, it is going to onion skin the rest, and now you could see where everything was. So again, whatever level of detail you want to put in, whether you want to do the outline of every square or just do this general grid, just make sure that whatever you're doing, you are repeating every single time. Otherwise, it will look weird, like detail is going to pop in and out, which is good if there's like motion blur or something gets far away from the camera. But when there's like only soft motion like we have right now until this Rubik's Cube gets picked up, it's going to be kind of weird. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to keep doing it like this, kind of like the very fast grid technique, and I will get back to you when that's done. Okay, one thing to mention here, now that the hand is coming over the Rubik's Cube, we're still going to use the same line technique, right? There's no reason it doesn't work, but you just terminate it a bit earlier, so where it connects to the hand. So this one goes till here, and remember, we do have a stroke on the hand already, so we'll kind of create this curvature. So yeah, only update here, same thing, just terminate the lines where they hit the other layer. Now, of course, what we could have done is we could have drawn the cube kind of fully each time and had the hand literally overlap with it using holdout shaders and all this, but like, why? I feel like this is like a more obvious way to do the rotoscoping anyhow. So just continue on like this. We'll get back to you in a minute. Okay, so I finished animating the cube, and I guess let's find out what it looks like. So again, this one was made using a different technique. So we're going to get rid of the background, and let's get rid of, so this is the way to get rid of onion skinning quickly. You can just hit that overlay button. But let's see. So we have a cube, and it gets picked up. Beautiful. Honestly, it looks pretty good. Only thing I would recommend adding is, again, we want to add a source of randomness to this Rubik's Cube because it's kind of like too perfectly made compared to the hand, I believe. So here's a quick way to do that. So again, our whole Rubik's Cube thing is on a single layer, which is perfect because if we want to affect it, we can say affect this layer and it's going to work. So in the modifiers, I believe for grease pencil, so we get a different set of modifiers than usual. We got modifiers made for strokes or for curves. Specifically, the one that's useful for us is noise. And you can see what noise is doing is it's literally shifting our strokes. So if we just kind of leave it as is, you can see this Rubik's Cube is a bit more poppy. Maybe you can tell. Poppy, that's a fucking word. But we can actually make this look a bit better. So I'm going to turn up the noise scale. Oh, by the way, you can see it's actually also influencing the hand. So this is kind of a cool way to do motion blur, by the way. But we're going to have it only affect the Rubik's layer. So now you can see it's only altering these strokes. So I'm just going to bump that up. I'm going to take down the position. The position is how much distortion there is. So I'm just going to bring that down. But what will really make this look hand-drawn is changing the thickness. So some lines are thicker than others, etc. And also the strength. So you can see now this feels a lot more hand-drawn. To take it up a notch, we can, again, increase the noise scale until it's what you want, maybe a bit more distortion. And yeah, now that feels a lot more hand-drawn. So here's without, and here's with. So this is just there's other things you can do. You can actually layer a couple modifiers to get more of a hand-drawn look, and that's what I did for the original sometimes. But this is like kind of the essence of it. So, okay, we've distorted it. Now kind of final thing for this kind of inking process. Is that what this is called? Just the outlining, whatever we call it. Let's just add in a bit of shading, contact, shadow, whatever. Nothing fancy. And this can also be its own layer. There are helicopters outside. So again, we're going to make this its own thing just in case we want to modify it later. So I'm just going to call this like shadows, even though it's really not going to be that. So what I'm thinking for the shadow layer is we're just going to do a very, very hand-drawn look. So I'm actually going to get rid of the, well, I'm trying to look for it, but what I want to do is I want to get rid of the stroke stabilization. If I can figure it out, I think we need to be on the draw tool, turn off stabilize stroke. This is going to make it so that if I draw a line and it's messy, that's just what it's going to be. And yeah, so we're going to make a shadow pass. And what I'm thinking for this is let's start with the hand. So for example, on this frame, you can see here there's some darker areas. So I'm just going to very lightly just draw some nonsense. It doesn't need to even be accurate. And you'll find that even with like a low amount of detail, like I'm doing here, like it doesn't really make sense. I'm just kind of scribbling over the areas that are a bit darker or maybe are on the edge and have some motion blur. This is actually going to add quite a bit of dimension. So I'm just going to do this super quickly to really illustrate the point. So I'm just going to shadow here. And again, this would be a good thing to turn onion skinning on for, so you can see where you did the extra shading from before, just so it looks a bit more consistent. But I'm just going to go for the flickery look anyhow. And this will be super useful once the beads, here we go, come into place. I could add a bit of a shadow underneath, like it's actually something that's on top of my hand that would cast a shadow, because there are a bunch of spheres. So just a bunch of messy stuff. Doesn't need to be good. Probably better if it is good, but whatever. Just kind of imply the direction of the lighting and where the shadow is, and that should be enough. Just want to make sure, yeah, I put in the bead shadow last time. Just want to be consistent. Nonsense here. Now, hopefully this is one of the few parts of the process that I do not need to time-lapse, since it's just so messy. Now, with my original animation, of course, I put in significantly more time. It still looks messy, but there's a lot more intention than what I'm doing. I mean, it's still the same general theory, darken dark areas, duh. But there was a lot more intention. So something like that. And we should be getting close to the end. So especially where we have these overlapping areas where the palm has a lot of curvature and stuff like this. You can see this finger. Oh, did I forget to draw that finger? We could just do that on this layer. Doesn't matter. Just be fast about it. Something like that. Like that. Some detail on the thumb, whatever. And especially if you are going for this very hand-drawn look, this will actually amplify it by 100, because it's going to make it look more chaotic and like you actually drew it on paper and stuff. And that's what we're going for, is it not? A lot of shadows here. Just draw some nonsense. And okay, that should be good. Let's see what this looks like with the shadowing. So I'm going to turn off the background. And it's subtle, but you can see this actually adds quite a bit. This is the kind of thing that would be better if I did a before and after. So here is, I guess let's do before first of all. So here's without shadowing, just very clean lines. And now with shadows. It's subtle, but I think it adds something. Oh, by the way, I'm noticing that I stopped shadowing on like this frame. But then, we don't want to have shadows on this frame because all the fingers are gone. Just hit I, insert blank keyframe, and that will take care of that. But you can see that does that. And what we could actually also do, it's a lot of work though, but what you could do, and this will really sell the effect, is you could add a bit of contact shadow. Like over the Rubik's Cube where you would imagine or where you can see there's like shadow coming in. Like that's big. So let's just do that quickly. It would just add quite a bit of realism. Like the objects are actually interacting rather than one being drawn and then the other, which is of course what did happen. But just put a bit of shadow. Oh, by the way, I think I accidentally... You don't want to draw, if you're doing on twos, you want to make sure you're actually doing that and not drawing frames in between accidentally. But you can see super messy, super fast process. We could even darken one side of the Rubik's Cube that appears darker. Here's a big shadow. Okay. Let's see what that looks like. There we go. If anything, I'd go back and make those a bit lighter. But by the way, that is something we could do. I guess I'll just mention. There's also a thickness modifier that we could say only affect the shadows. And what thickness does is we could be like, oh, make them darker or lighter, which I guess just means thinner or thicker. But that's just another thing. And that's that. Now, what you could do at this point, if you wanted to, and I guess it might make sense because it is a Rubik's Cube, is you could do a bit of coloring. I don't think I'll do the full process here, but maybe I'll just get you started on coloring if you wanted to, although most of my drawings were pretty much just this. There was a tiny bit of color involved, but here's how you do that. So let's just turn this on so I know which square is red, which one's whatever. What we can do is we can also make a layer for the, we call these fills. I'm not an artist. I don't know if this is correct, but I'm going to call it a fill, and I'm going to put it underneath everything. So if I draw something, it will literally be underneath the stack, which is important for this. So for the fill, what we're going to do is we're actually going to make a new material. We haven't talked about materials yet, but basically every single layer we've been using has been using this black material. Just means when I draw, it looks black. I'm going to make a new material. Let's call this one red. And red is not going to have a stroke. Like I don't want to see the line. I just want to see the area, the filling. And I want to make that like red. So again, what we're doing here is we're just coloring a square is the idea. So on the fill layer, using this material, which you can also see here, what we should be able to do, let's see, is we select this fill tool and we go like that. And there you go. You can see it's filled in that square. You could also try to like hand draw it like this. Whoops, I guess I used the same tool. You can also try to draw it like this, but you know, that's very time consuming. So if you can swing it, I'd recommend going like this, and then you go 2 frames down, you update it, 2 frames down, you update it, and you could have up the precision and all this to make it a bit cleaner, and you could have it use the modifier since, again, this Rubik's Cube. Oh, I guess I forgot a line there. Let's just add that in. So this is whatever. Nope. Make sure we're using the correct material for this. So now we're on the Rubik's layer again. We want to draw a line like that. And that should, and this is kind of how we can go back and forth, and you can see the noise already got applied. We should just be able now to update the fill. It did not like that. Why? Because we were using the wrong material. Boop. So each stroke could actually have its own material, it seems. So you can see now the red looks like it's tracking on, and of course you just kind of continue it. Now the only other thing I want to mention before we wrap this up, if you have a situation, I don't know if this one will be, here we go. So if you have a situation where you try to hit one of these, but it goes through, it kind of fills in both of them because you can see there's a tiny, tiny gap in between. Here's how you fix that, because I don't want to redraw and make sure all these lines are connected. What you do is for the fill options, go to advanced, go to stroke extension, which literally means take these strokes and extend them and fill based off that. Take this, bring it up a bit, and now when you hit this, you can see there's this line that kind of connects it, and now it will, you know, be there. So you can see how that's useful. Either way, at this point, you just color the cube, you animate the thing, and boom, final result. But you can see how we got there. So anyways, that's it for that.
So I hope you learned something from that. That's pretty much my full workflow, plus or minus like a couple details about modifiers. But generally, that is how I rotoscope in Blender. So I'm sure you got something out of it. Now, at this point, again, I just want to mention XP Pen. This is the graphics tablet I used, Artist Pro 16. They sent it to me for free in exchange for like using it in a tutorial. And I'm like, you know what? That's fair. And after using this for like legitimately 3 days of like 8 hours a day, like using it for a good amount of time to know if I like or dislike it, I genuinely like it. It's generally good. Pen's nice. It's got buttons and standard stuff, but I think what might be special about this, I'm pretty sure, is this scroll wheel and this like zooming in. I don't know if it's like a pressure sensitive or whatever, but I've used it to zoom like in and out of Blender, or you can use it to scroll up and down things. There's also these customizable buttons, so you could like have one be Shift, Control, Alt, whatever. But no complaints. Good resolution screen, bright enough for me. Pen is responsive, and the pressure works the way I'd expect. So I don't know. I don't actually have any complaints, mostly because I don't know what the complaints like would be. Like I'm not a professional animator or anything, but I would recommend this. It's great. So thank you. I'll be using it in the future when I animate. So I just wanted to mention this is what I used. It's great. I enjoyed it. Maybe check it out. I don't know. But yeah, that's the drawing workflow. Leave a like if you like. Leave a comment if you want to say something. Subscribe it. I don't know. That's it. See ya.